suspect that in this respect, the new administration will not differ markedly from the proposal that President Bush made, and which failed in the last Congress, but perhaps has a better chance to succeed in this one. And essentially, that proposal was that there be a reinforcement of protections at the border to ensure that those who are not legally allowed entrance into this country are prevented from entering as best as possible, but a recognition that with 10 or 11 million people already here upon whom our own economy is highly dependent for its success, particularly now when we are in such economic jeopardy, that some way has to be found to offer citizenship to those people if they qualify in certain fundamental ways. And those ways have been debated and outlined. Some believe that they should become relatively fluent in English. Others believe that they should have to return to their home countries first and then make application. The details are complicated, but what is not complicated, I think, is a recognition that our society has chosen to allow many immigrants to do the jobs that Americans themselves don't want to do. And that until we find some way to integrate those individuals who are doing those important but in some cases unpleasant jobs for the rest of us, we are never going to have either a truly equal society or a truly stable one. And particularly now, with the economic crisis about us, now is not the time to try to summarily remove millions and millions of people upon whom our economy has become dependent.
Humanitarianism around the world will be complicated, or you think we'll reach, like, make any real progress towards that in the near future?
Well, what is certainly true is that the people who are going to be most affected by this global economic crisis are the poorest people in the world. We ourselves here may think that we have it bad because we're having trouble getting loans for cars or college or houses, or our pension plans are plummeting, or whatever the problem may be. But we have it nothing compared to the people, 1 billion of the 5 billion people on this earth, who live on less than $2 a day. Those are the people who are really going to suffer. And you've asked a very pointed question, which is, are we going to remain generous of spirit? And the truth is that the United States has been far less generous of spirit in its government offering of development aid to those poor people than many other countries in the West. But are we going to be committed to a generous spirit of humanitarianism even in the face of our own economic problems? And I think that's a very big question. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that we're all in this together, all 5 billion of us. And if suddenly those societies, that bottom billion, the poorest of the poor, start utterly collapsing, we are going to see more terrorism, we are going to see more disease spread around the world, we are going to see more economic problems for every single one of us, we are going to see more environmental catastrophes. So it is certainly in our best interest to maintain our commitment to humanitarianism in a wide variety of forms.
change. I'm curious what kind of college
this is an opportunity to plug the Amnesty chapter that you have here at Elon, because Amnesty International is one of the most effective ways that people at the grassroots who want to be involved in human rights change can do so. I might just say one brief word about how Amnesty began. It began in 1961, and it began in relationship to students. It began in 1961 when a British lawyer named Peter Benenson read of two college students in Portugal, which was then under the control of a vicious dictator named Salazar. Two college students in Portugal who had been imprisoned for no greater crime than having raised their glasses of beer and toasted to freedom in their local college pub. I guess they didn't have drinking laws and age laws in those days. I don't know, in Portugal. But Peter Benenson put an editorial in a London newspaper and invited British citizens to write to the Portuguese government and ask for the release of these prisoners. And much to his astonishment, thousands and thousands of British citizens did that. And the Portuguese government, which had been accustomed to doing anything it wanted to its own citizens, said, what is all this international uproar about these two vermin? And it let them go. And that was the seed of the idea that sometimes, by bearing witness to human rights crimes around the world, by being engaged, as Amnesty International tries not just any longer through only letter writing, but in many ways to be engaged, sometimes that can make a real difference. And in the face of crises such as Darfur, as I've tried to briefly describe to you, and others, that kind of engagement will make an enormous difference. We can't do it alone. No individual can do it alone. We have to do it in association with one another. And whether it's Amnesty or any number of other groups that students may want to be involved in, they seize their passion, find whatever it is that does seize your passion, and find others who share it and work together with them. There are many, many ways to do that. Other questions?
Hello, is there anything about President Bush's administration that you would say you found praiseworthy from a human rights perspective?
Yes. Yes, there were a number of things that the president did. One of the most notable was he increased very substantially the amount of money available to fight AIDS in Africa. And I think the president can the former president can take great pride in the efforts that he made in that respect. And another thing I would mention is what I just referred to earlier in response to the first question, which was the president's attempt, at least, flawed though it may have been, to find some compromise to deal with this very controversial issue of immigration. As a former governor of Texas, the president was well aware of what I said earlier, that the country was dependent upon immigrants economically, and he knew that we couldn't just turn them back in massive numbers and throw them out of the country. And he sought, as best he could, to find some compromise. It didn't work out, but I will say that's not for his failure of trying. So those are at least two examples.
Thanks for coming to Elon. I wanted to ask on the issue of torture and the Obama administration. Do you believe that there's a genuine commitment at all levels, intelligence agencies and military, et cetera, in all places, not just Guantanamo, to end torture? Or do you think, as some people have argued,